What if the first words we ever spoke were not spoken at all, but carved? What if language, in its truest form, was not a sound that left the lips but a mark pressed into stone, scratched onto bone, etched into the skin of the earth before our throats even knew how to shape the complexity of meaning? What if the story we've been told about how we became human is backwards, and the symbols came first, whispering in silence long before the voice learned to sing? Imagine standing at the edge of a cave in southern France, the kind of place where the air still holds the chill of 10,000 winters. The walls are covered in ochre and charcoal, images of animals that no longer walk this world. But beneath those beasts, older than the paintings themselves, there are marks, lines, dots, crescents. They are deliberate, they are repeated, they are not random, and they are older than the language we use to describe them. These are not the scribbles of idle hands. These are symbols, and they predate the moment when we believe humans could fully articulate complex thought through speech. So what were they saying? And to whom? If you're drawn to the kind of history that sleeps between myth and archaeology, if you find yourself pulled toward the questions we were never supposed to ask, then stay with me. Like this video only if it speaks to something unspoken within you. Subscribe only if you're ready to walk backward through time, past the point where certainty ends and wonder begins. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know where in the world you are as we unravel this together. Are you in a quiet room? On a long drive? Lying in bed? Waiting for sleep? Tell me, because this story is as much yours as it is mine. For over a century, the accepted narrative has been clear. Speech came first. Our ancestors, millions of years ago, began to make sounds. Grunts became words. Words became sentences. Language evolved in the mouth, in the throat, in the breath between thoughts. And only after we had learned to speak, only after we had mastered the complexities of oral communication, did we begin to write. Writing, we are told, is a recent invention. 5,000 years old at best. Convenience. A tool for record-keeping. A late addition to the human toolkit. But what if that story is wrong? There is a growing body of evidence, quiet and unsettling, that suggests symbols, marks, and what we might cautiously call proto-writing existed long before our vocal anatomy could produce the full range of sounds required for modern language. These marks appear in places scattered across continents. Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia. They emerge from layers of earth that correspond to periods when, according to evolutionary biology, the human larynx had not yet descended fully, when the hyoid bone had not yet settled into the position that allows for the articulation of complex phonemes. And yet, there they are. Marks that repeat. Patterns that recur. Symbols that seem to carry meaning. In Blombo's cave, on the southern coast of South Africa, archaeologists discovered pieces of ochre etched with cross-hatched patterns. The age of these artifacts, 75,000 years. 75,000 years ago, our ancestors were inscribing geometric designs onto ochre, mixing pigments, creating something that goes beyond mere decoration. The lines are too consistent, too regular to be accidental. They form grids. They form sequences. They are intentional. And they are far, far older than any spoken language we can reconstruct. Move north and west across the Mediterranean into Europe. In caves scattered throughout France and Spain, in places like Chauvet and El Castillo, beneath the famous paintings of horses and bison, there are older marks. Rows of dots, clusters of lines, U-shaped curves repeated in sequences. Some researchers call them signs. Others hesitate to call them anything at all, because to name them is to admit what they might be. And what they might be is terrifying in its implications. They might be a form of communication that predates the development of vocal language. They might be the first writing, not cuneiform, not hieroglyphs, not alphabets, but something older, something that came before the voice. Consider the timeline. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. But the anatomical features required for fully modern speech, the descended larynx, the precise control of the tongue and lips, the neural wiring necessary to produce and process rapid sequences of phonemes, these did not fully develop until much later. Some estimates place the full anatomical capacity for modern speech as recently as 70,000 to 50,000 years ago. And yet, symbolic behavior, the creation of intentional marks that carry potential meaning, appears in the archaeological record well before that threshold. At Blombos, at Diepkloof Rock Shelter, at sites across the African continent, we see evidence of symbolic thought, of the deliberate creation of repeating patterns, dating back 90,000 years or more. So what does that mean? If the symbols predate the full vocal capacity for language, then either our understanding of when speech evolved is wrong, or the symbols are not dependent on speech. They are something else. They are a form of communication that does not require sound. A language of the hand, of the eye, of the mark left behind. A language that could be seen, remembered, and understood without ever being spoken aloud. And these marks are not isolated. They are not random. They appear again and again, across vast distances and spans of time. In Australia, on rock shelters in Arnhem Land, there are cupules, small circular depressions hammered into stone, some of which date back 75,000 years or more. In India, at Bhimbetka, similar cupules and geometric engravings have been found in layers that predate any known written language by tens of thousands of years. In the Levant, in Africa, in Europe, the same basic forms appear. Dots, lines, zigzags, crosshatches, circles. They are simple, yes, but simplicity is not the same as meaninglessness. The alphabet is simple. Binary code is simple. Simplicity can carry infinite complexity if the system behind it is structured. Were these marks a language? Were they a proto-writing system that allowed our ancestors to communicate across time and space without the need for sound? Or were they something else entirely, something we do not yet have the framework to understand? Part 2 Word count. 1,000. Let us sit with the possibility for a moment. Let us entertain the idea that before we spoke, we wrote. Not in the way we think of writing now, not with grammar and syntax and conjugated verbs, but with marks that meant something. Marks that could be read. Marks that were intended to be understood. If that is true, then the entire architecture of how we became human shifts. Language is no longer a product of the voice. It is a product of the hand, of the eye, of the mind that sees a shape and assigns it meaning. There is a field of study, relatively new and cautiously explored, called archaeosemiotics. It seeks to understand the earliest symbols created by humans, to decode the meaning, if any, behind the marks left on bone, stone, and ochre. The researchers in this field do not make bold claims. They are careful. They know the danger of overinterpretation. But they have noticed something. The symbols are not random. They cluster. They repeat. And they follow patterns that are eerily similar to the patterns found in early writing systems. Take, for instance, the concept of grammar. Grammar is not just the rules we use to arrange words in a sentence. Grammar is structure. It is the framework that allows meaning to be transmitted from one mind to another in a predictable, replicable way. In spoken language, grammar governs word order, tense, plurality, and relationship. But grammar does not require speech. It only requires structure. And structure can exist in marks. In the caves of Europe, researchers have catalogued over 30 distinct symbols that appear repeatedly across hundreds of sites spanning 30,000 years. These symbols do not change randomly. They appear in specific combinations. Certain symbols are frequently paired with others. Some appear in sequences that suggest order, repetition, and possibly even syntax. One symbol might appear at the beginning of a cluster, another at the end. Rows of dots might be followed by a line, which is then followed by another distinct shape. This is not decoration. Decoration does not require consistency across millennia and continents. This is something else. This is pattern. And pattern is the foundation of language. Genevieve von Petzinger, a paleoanthropologist who has dedicated years to studying these symbols, has argued that they may represent the earliest form of graphic communication. She does not call it writing, not yet, but she does not dismiss the possibility. She has created a database of these symbols, charting their distribution across space and time, and what she has found is striking. The same symbols appear in caves separated by thousands of miles. The same motifs recur across tens of thousands of years. If these were simply the idle doodles of ancient humans, we would expect far more variation. We would expect randomness. But randomness is not what we find. We find repetition. We find consistency. We find something that looks uncomfortably like a system. Now consider the human brain. The areas of the brain responsible for language processing, Broca's area and Wernicke's area, are not solely dedicated to speech. They are also involved in the processing of symbolic thought, of gesture, and of visual signs. In modern humans, damage to these areas can impair not only the ability to speak but also the ability to understand written language or to produce meaningful gestures. This suggests that the neural architecture for language is not fundamentally tied to vocalization. It is tied to the processing of symbols, whether those symbols are sounds, marks, or movements. If the brain can process written symbols and gestural signs using the same areas that process speech, then it is entirely possible that symbolic communication, visual language, evolved independently of or even before vocal language. There is more. In recent decades, studies of modern primates have shown that chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas can learn to use symbols to communicate. They can be taught sign language. They can be taught to associate shapes with meanings. They can even create simple sequences of symbols to express needs, desires, and concepts. These primates do not have the vocal anatomy required for human speech. Their larynxes are positioned too high. Their tongues lack the necessary flexibility. And yet, they can communicate using symbols. They can learn a form of language that does not require sound. If modern primates can do this, why couldn't our own ancestors? The fossil record tells us that early Homo sapiens, and even earlier hominins like Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis, had brains large enough to support complex symbolic thought. They created tools. They controlled fire. They buried their dead with care and ritual. These behaviors require planning, abstract thinking, and the ability to communicate complex ideas. But their vocal anatomy was not yet fully modern. Their ability to produce the range of sounds necessary for complex spoken language was limited. So how did they communicate? How did they transmit knowledge across generations, coordinate group activities, and share the abstract concepts required for ritual and toolmaking? Perhaps they used marks. Perhaps they used symbols. Perhaps they wrote before they spoke. There is a term in linguistics, iconicity. It refers to the idea that a symbol directly resembles what it represents. A drawing of a bison represents a bison. A circle might represent the sun or the moon. Iconicity is the simplest form of symbolic communication, and it does not require a pre-existing spoken language. A child who has not yet learned to speak can still understand that a picture of a dog represents a dog. Our earliest ancestors, even without complex vocal language, could have used iconic symbols to represent objects, animals, actions, and concepts. And from iconicity, more abstract systems can develop. A circle no longer means only the sun. It means warmth or time or cycle. A line no longer means only a spear. It means direction or boundary or connection. The symbol becomes detached from its literal referent and begins to carry layered meaning. This is the birth of abstraction. And abstraction is the foundation of all true language. In the deserts of Namibia, at a site called Apollo 11 Cave, archaeologists discovered stone plaques painted with images of animals. The age? Between 25 and 27,000 years. But beneath those images there are older marks, scratches, lines, geometric patterns. They are faint, worn by time, but they are there. And they are older than the paintings. What were they? Were they attempts at communication? Were they maps? Were they records? Or were they something we cannot yet name because we do not yet have the conceptual framework to understand a language that existed before speech? Part 3 Word Count. 1000. Let us go deeper. Let us examine the grammar-like patterns that appear in these ancient marks, because if there is structure, then there is potential for language. Language, at its core, is not about sounds or letters. Language is about the transmission of meaning through a structured system of symbols. Those symbols can be sounds. They can be gestures. They can be marks on stone. What matters is the structure. At the site of Diepkloof Rock Shelter in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered engraved ostrich eggshells dating back 60,000 years. The engravings are not random. They are geometric. They are repetitive. And most importantly, they are organized. Certain patterns appear only on certain types of eggshells. Some patterns are exclusive to specific layers of the site, suggesting they were created during distinct periods of time. The patterns evolve. Early engravings are simple, parallel lines. Later engravings introduce cross-hatching, more complex intersections, deliberate framing. This is not static. This is a system that changes over time. And change over time, the evolution of form and complexity, is one of the hallmarks of language. Imagine for a moment that you are holding one of these eggshells. The surface is smooth, cool in your hand. The lines are shallow but precise. Your finger traces the crosshatch, the careful intersection of one set of lines with another. You did not speak the word boundary or division, but you understand it because the symbol shows it to you. You see the pattern, and your brain, wired for symbolic processing, assigns meaning. This is communication. Silent, yes, but communication nonetheless. Now consider the cognitive load required to produce such patterns. To engrave a consistent crosshatch into the curved surface of an eggshell requires fine motor control, spatial awareness, and planning. You must envision the final pattern before you begin. You must hold that image in your mind and translate it through your hand into the material. This is not reflex. This is not instinct. This is abstract thought made physical. And if our ancestors were capable of this 60,000 years ago, when their vocal anatomy was still developing, then they were capable of language. Perhaps not spoken language, but language nonetheless. The marks are not confined to tools and shelters. They appear on the human body itself. In ancient burial sites across Europe and Asia, skeletal remains have been found with evidence of deliberate scarification and tattooing. The tools used to create these marks, bone needles and ochre-stained implements, have been discovered alongside the remains. The patterns are geometric. Lines radiating from a central point, rows of dots along the forearm, circular designs around joints. These were not accidents. They were intentional. They were permanent, and they were meant to be seen. What did these marks mean? Were they identifiers, a way to signal clan or status without speaking? Were they records, a tally of hunts or seasons or losses etched into the skin so that the body became a living archive? Were they magical, protective symbols meant to ward off harm or invoke favor? We do not know, but we know they were meaningful. We know they were important enough to endure pain, infection, and risk to create. And we know that they communicated something to those who saw them, a language of the skin, a language that did not need to be spoken to be understood. There is another layer to consider. Rhythm, repetition, structure. These are not only features of language. They are features of music. And music, like symbolic marks, predates complex speech. Bone flutes discovered in Germany, carved from the wing bones of vultures, date back 40,000 years. But the impulse to create rhythm, to mark time, to produce patterns of sound, is likely far older. Ethnomusicologists have noted that rhythm is one of the most fundamental elements of human cognition. Infants respond to rhythm before they respond to melody. The heartbeat is rhythm. Walking is rhythm. The breath is rhythm. And rhythm, like grammar, is structure. It is a system, can carry meaning. If our ancestors were creating rhythmic patterns in sound and geometric patterns in marks at the same time or even before they developed full vocal language, then it is possible that these systems were interconnected. A drumbeat might correspond to a mark on a bone. A carved line might represent a count, a measure, a duration. The symbol and the sound work together, reinforcing each other, creating a multisensory system of communication that does not rely solely on speech. This is not far-fetched. Modern writing systems often carry phonetic information. Letters represent sounds. But early symbolic systems may have worked differently. The mark may not have represented a sound at all. It may have represented a concept directly, bypassing vocalization entirely. In the field of cognitive archaeology, Researchers study how ancient humans thought by examining the material traces they left behind. One of the key findings is that symbolic thought, the ability to let one thing stand for another, appears very early in the human lineage. Even Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives, created symbolic objects. They engraved patterns into bone. They collected and curated unusual stones and fossils. They painted their bodies with ochre. These behaviors indicate that the capacity for symbolic thought is not unique to Homo sapiens. It is older. It is deeper. It is woven into the fabric of what it means to be human, or even almost human. And if symbolic thought is that old, then the possibility that symbols were used for communication, for the transmission of meaning, is not radical. It is logical. It is, in fact, more surprising that we have resisted this conclusion for so long. Perhaps it is because writing, in our modern understanding, is so closely tied to civilization, to cities, to record-keeping and literature and law. We think of writing as a sophisticated, late development. But what if writing, in its most fundamental sense, is not sophisticated at all? What if it is primal? What if the first human who ever pressed a mark into clay or scratched a line into bone was not inventing something new but expressing something ancient, something that had been waiting inside the mind, waiting for the hand to finally set it free? Part 4 Word count. 1000. Let us consider the global nature of this phenomenon, because the marks do not appear in just one region or one culture. They appear everywhere. Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and eventually the Americas. Wherever humans went, they left marks. And those marks, separated by oceans and millennia, share eerie similarities. This is not coincidence. This is pattern on a scale that transcends geography and culture. This is something fundamental to the human mind. In Australia, the rock art of the indigenous peoples stretches back at least 65,000 years, possibly longer. The oldest confirmed images are simple handprints, stencils created by blowing ochre over an outstretched hand. But alongside these images, there are other marks. Cupules, small round indentations hammered into the rock face. Rows of them, clusters, patterns. They are found at sites across the continent, from Arnhem Land to the Kimberley to the deserts of the interior. Some researchers believe these cupules are among the oldest deliberately created marks on Earth. And they are not unique to Australia. Cupules appear in southern Africa, in India, in Europe. The same basic form, repeated across continents, across unimaginable spans of time. What were they? Calendars? Tallies? Markers of territory or ritual? Or were they, in the simplest sense, a way of saying, I was here, I marked this place, I made meaning? The act of marking is, in itself, a form of communication. Says, this is not random. This is intentional. This is me reaching across time to you, whoever you are, whenever you are, to tell you that I existed and that I thought. In the Levant, in a cave called Kafza in modern-day Israel, archaeologists discovered burials dating back 100,000 years. The bodies were laid to rest with care. Red ochre was sprinkled over the remains. Tools and shells were placed alongside them. But on the walls of the cave there are marks. Faint, almost invisible now, but there. Lines, angles, curves. They are not part of any known writing system. They are older than any script. But they are there, in the same space where the dead were honored, where ritual and meaning and memory converged. Were these marks part of the ritual? Were they names? Were they prayers? We do not know. But the fact that they exist, that someone felt compelled to make them in that sacred space, suggests they carried weight. They mattered. Move east into the vast stretches of Siberia. At a site called Denisova Cave, home to a now extinct lineage of hominins, archaeologists found evidence of symbolic behavior. Carved bone fragments, perforated beads, engraved stones. The Denisovans were not Homo sapiens. They were a separate branch of the human family tree. And yet they, too, created symbols. They, too, left marks. This pushes the timeline of symbolic thought back even further, suggesting that the impulse to create meaning through marks is not even unique to our species. It is something older, something inherited from a common ancestor, something that multiple lineages of hominins carried within them. What does this tell us? It tells us that the creation of symbols, the drive to communicate through marks, is not a cultural invention. It is a biological imperative. It is hardwired into the brain. And if it is hardwired, then it is entirely plausible that visual symbols, marks that carry meaning, emerged before, or at least alongside, the development of vocal language. There is a hypothesis, controversial but compelling, proposed by some researchers in the fields of evolutionary psychology and linguistics. It suggests that early humans may have used a multimodal communication system, combining gestures, vocalizations, and visual symbols. None of these modes was fully developed on its own. Early vocalizations were limited, constrained by anatomy. Gestures were effective but required line of sight and could not be used in the dark or over long distances. Visual symbols, marks left on stone or bone or skin, could persist. They could be revisited. They could communicate across time. Together, these three modes, voice, gesture, and mark, formed a proto-language that was richer and more flexible than any single mode alone. This hypothesis is supported by studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies. Many of these groups use complex systems of signs, marks, and visual cues alongside spoken language. The Aboriginal Australians, for instance, have intricate systems of ground drawings, body painting, and carved message sticks that convey information about travel routes, water sources, and social relationships. These visual systems are not secondary to spoken language. They are integral. They are, in some contexts, more precise and more enduring than speech. If modern humans still use these multimodal systems, why wouldn't our ancestors have relied on them even more heavily when vocal language was less developed? Consider also the role of the environment. Early humans lived in a world that was often silent, vast, and unforgiving. Sound travels, but not always far, and not through every terrain. In dense forests, in wind-swept plains, in the roar of rivers, the voice can be swallowed. But a mark on a tree, a cairn of stones, a carved symbol on a bone left at a campsite, these persist. They can be seen. They can be interpreted. They can guide those who come after. In such a world, visual communication is not a luxury. It is a necessity. And there is something else. Something we often overlook because we are so deeply embedded in the culture of spoken language. Writing, in our modern sense, is not just a tool for communication. It is a tool for thought. The act of writing, of externalizing thought onto a physical medium, changes the way we think. It allows us to hold complex ideas in view, to manipulate them, to revisit them, to build upon them over time. This is why writing is so closely associated with the development of complex societies, mathematics, philosophy, and science. But the cognitive benefits of externalized symbolic thought do not require a fully developed alphabetic writing system. Even simple marks, if they are used systematically, can serve as anchors for thought. A notched bone can be a calendar, tracking lunar cycles or seasonal migrations. A carved line can be a boundary, a conceptual division between here and there, ours and theirs. These are not just records. They are thinking tools. If our ancestors discovered, even in a rudimentary way, that marks could help them think, then the creation of symbols would have been powerfully selected for. Groups that could externalize and share information through marks would have had an advantage over groups that relied solely on memory and oral tradition. They could plan more effectively. They could coordinate across larger distances. They could transmit knowledge more accurately across generations. In short, they could think better. And better thinking means survival. Part 5 word count. 1,000. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. Let us acknowledge the enormous gap between what we know and what we can prove. The marks are real. The patterns are real. The ages are real. But meaning, intent, and structure, these are inferred. We look at a series of lines on a piece of ochre and we say, this could be language. But could is not the same as is. The honest answer is that we do not know. We may never know. The people who made these marks are gone. Their minds are silent. The symbols they left behind are enigmatic, beautiful, and maddeningly ambiguous. Some researchers argue that we are overinterpreting, that we are projecting our own linguistic frameworks onto marks that may have had no communicative function at all. Perhaps they were simply aesthetic. Perhaps early humans derived pleasure from creating patterns, from the repetition of form, from the act of making itself with no intent to communicate. Art for art's sake. Pattern for pattern's sake. This is possible. We cannot dismiss it. But even if the marks were aesthetic, even if they were not language in any conventional sense, they still tell us something profound. They tell us that early humans had the cognitive capacity to perceive pattern, to create it, and to value it. And the perception and creation of pattern is the foundation of all symbolic thought. You cannot have language without pattern. You cannot have mathematics without pattern. You cannot have music, or art, or architecture without pattern. If our ancestors were creating patterns 70, 80, 90,000 years ago, then they had the cognitive substrate necessary for language. The question is not whether they could have developed a system of symbolic communication. The question is whether they did. And here is where the evidence, while tantalizing, remains frustratingly incomplete. We have the marks. We do not have the key. We have the symbols. We do not have the syntax. We have the traces of something that looks like language, but we cannot read it. We are like archaeologists 1,000 years from now, excavating the ruins of our own civilization, finding keyboards and screens but no power, no access to the digital information they once contained. We know something was there. We can see the structure. But the meaning is locked away, perhaps forever. Yet there are hints. There are moments when the veil seems almost thin enough to see through. In the caves of La Paziega in Spain, researchers discovered a series of red dots arranged in a vertical line. Radiocarbon dating placed them at more than 64,000 years old. 64,000 years. This is before modern Homo sapiens are believed to have arrived in Europe. The only hominins in the region at that time were Neanderthals. Neanderthals made those dots. Neanderthals, who we once dismissed as brutish and incapable of symbolic thought, were creating intentional, structured marks. And if they were, then the capacity for symbolic communication is not unique to Homo sapiens. It is older. It is shared. It is part of the deep heritage of the human lineage. In another cave, Maltreviso, also in Spain, a hand stencil was dated to more than 66,000 years ago. Again, Neanderthal. The act of placing one's hand against the wall and blowing pigment over it, creating a negative image, is deeply symbolic. It is a declaration. It is a way of saying, I was here. I marked this place. I am part of this world. And if Neanderthals were making such declarations, then they were thinking symbolically. And if they were thinking symbolically, then the possibility that they were also communicating symbolically, through marks or gestures or some system we have not yet conceived, is not far-fetched. There is a growing recognition among researchers that we have underestimated our ancestors and our cousins. We have assumed that language, as we understand it, is the pinnacle of cognitive achievement, and that anything less than modern speech is primitive. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if there were other forms of language, other ways of thinking and communicating, that we have lost or never fully developed? What if the marks on the cave walls are not failed attempts to write as we write, but successful expressions of a different kind of language altogether, one that we can no longer access because our minds have been reshaped by tens of thousands of years of spoken and written language? This is not a comfortable thought. It suggests that there are ways of being human, ways of thinking and communicating, that we have forgotten. It suggests that the story we tell ourselves about progress, about moving from simplicity to complexity, from silence to speech, from darkness to light, may not be the whole story. It suggests that there were other paths, other possibilities, that history did not choose. And perhaps that is why these marks unsettle us. They are evidence of minds that were like ours but not quite ours. They are evidence of intelligence, creativity, and symbolic thought existing in forms we cannot fully reconstruct. They are evidence that the question, what makes us human, does not have a simple answer. Language makes us human, yes. But which language? Spoken language? Written language? Gestural language? Symbolic language? All of them? None of them, uniquely? Perhaps what makes us human is not any one mode of communication but the drive itself. The need to reach out, to make meaning, to leave a mark that says, I am here. I thought. I existed. Look at yourself in the mirror. Look at your hands. These hands can write. They can type. They can gesture. They can sign. They can carve and engrave and paint. These hands are the descendants of the hands that pressed ochre into stone, that scratched lines into bone, that left marks in the dark. And your brain, the same brain that processes these words, is wired to see pattern, to assign meaning, to create symbols. This capacity is ancient. It is older than cities, older than agriculture, older than pottery and metallurgy, and perhaps even older than speech itself. We are not the inventors of language. We are the inheritors. And what we have inherited is not a single gift but a spectrum, a range of ways to communicate, to think, to be. The marks on the cave walls are part of that inheritance. They are messages from the deep past, written in a language we have almost forgotten. But almost is not the same as entirely. The symbols are still there. The patterns are still visible. And somewhere, in the back of our minds, in the structures of our brains, the memory of that language persists. Part 6 Word Count. 1000. Let us turn now to a question that haunts this entire inquiry. If these marks were a form of proto-language, if they were a system of communication that existed before or alongside the development of speech, then why did we lose it? Why do modern humans rely so overwhelmingly on vocal language, relegating written language to a secondary, derivative role? Why did the marks, if they once carried meaning, fall silent? The answer may lie in efficiency. Spoken language is fast. It is flexible. It allows for real-time interaction, for the rapid exchange of information, for the expression of nuance, emotion, and complex relational dynamics. Spoken language can convey tone, can adapt on the fly. It can be used in the dark, over long distances, while the hands are occupied with other tasks. Once the vocal anatomy evolved to support complex speech, once the brain's language centers became fully optimized for processing rapid phonetic sequences, spoken language would have had a significant selective advantage. It would have become the dominant mode of communication, and other modes, gestural and symbolic, would have been relegated to supplementary roles. But they did not disappear. Even today, we gesture when we speak. We draw diagrams. We write notes. We create symbols. The impulse to externalize thought through marks is still with us. It simply operates alongside and often in service of spoken language. But what if, in the distant past, before speech became dominant, the relationship was reversed? What if symbolic marks were primary and vocalizations were secondary? What if our ancestors thought in symbols, in images, in patterns pressed into the world, and only gradually began to translate those thoughts into sound? There is a theory known as the gesture-first hypothesis, which suggests that language did not begin with speech at all but with manual gestures. This hypothesis is supported by several lines of evidence. First, the brain regions that control language are adjacent to and overlap with the regions that control hand movements. Second, great apes, our closest living relatives, are far better at learning and using gestural communication than they are at producing vocalizations. Third, infants often gesture meaningfully before they speak their first words. Pointing, reaching, waving, these are communicative acts, and they emerge early in development, suggesting they may tap into older, deeper neural pathways. If the gesture-first hypothesis is correct, then it is a small step from gesture to mark. A gesture is ephemeral. It exists only in the moment, but a mark persists. A gesture made in the air can be translated into a line carved in wood, a shape scratched into stone, a pattern pressed into clay. The mark becomes a frozen gesture, a permanent record of a communicative act. And if our ancestors were already using gestures to communicate, then the transition to using marks would have been natural, even inevitable. But this raises another question. If marks were being used as a form of communication, why did they not evolve into a full writing system earlier? Then they did? Why did tens of thousands of years pass between the first symbolic marks and the development of cuneiform, hieroglyphics, and alphabetic scripts? What took so long? One possibility is population size and social complexity. Writing, in its full form, emerges in response to the needs of complex societies. Record-keeping, administration, law, literature, these are the functions of writing in civilizations. Small, nomadic groups of hunter-gatherers may have used symbolic marks for communication, but they did not need a full writing system. Their needs were different. They needed to mark territory, track seasons, convey warnings, perhaps record significant events. But they did not need contracts, tax records, inventories, or legal codes. The symbolic marks they created were sufficient for their purposes. It was only when humans began to settle, to farm, to build cities, to create hierarchies and institutions, that the pressure to develop more elaborate, more standardized systems of writing became overwhelming. Another possibility is that the early marks were too ambiguous, too context-dependent, to function as a full writing system. A line might mean boundary in one context and river in another. A circle might represent the sun, or the moon, or simply round thing. Without a standardized code, without agreed-upon rules for how symbols relate to sounds or concepts, the marks could only convey limited, localized meaning. They were useful, but they were not scalable. The leap from context-dependent symbolic marks to a fully grammatical, replicable writing system is enormous. It requires abstraction, standardization, and widespread social agreement. It requires, in short, civilization. But let us not dismiss the early marks because they did not become writing in the way we recognize it. They were still communication. They were still language of a kind. And they were the foundation upon which later systems were built. Every written script, no matter how elaborate, traces its ancestry back to simple marks. The alphabet you are reading right now, the letters that carry these words from my mind to yours, began as pictures. Pictures became symbols. Symbols became signs. Signs became letters. And letters, stripped of their iconic origins, became pure abstractions, capable of representing any sound, any word, any thought. This is evolution. Not biological evolution, but cultural evolution. And it began with a mark. A single, deliberate mark, pressed into the skin of the world by a hand that sought to mean something. Imagine that hand now. Imagine the person who held it. They are long gone, dust upon dust, lost to the grinding wheel of time. But the mark remains. And because it remains, they are not entirely gone. They speak to us, across the abyss of millennia, in a language we have almost forgotten. They say, I was here. I thought. I made meaning. Remember me. And we do. Not as individuals. Not as names or faces or stories. But as presence. As evidence. As the first voice in the long conversation that is humanity. Perhaps that is what language has always been. Not words or sounds or letters, but connection. The reaching out of one mind to another across space, across time, across the silent void that separates self from other. The marks on the cave walls are the first reaching, the first attempt to bridge the gap. And we, here, now, reading and writing and speaking and listening, we are the continuation of that reaching. We are the marks made flesh, the symbols made sound, the ancient impulse to connect made manifest in a million forms. Part 7 Word Count. 1000. Let us consider now the specific patterns that suggest not just symbolic thought but structured communication, something approaching grammar. Because if these marks were merely decorative or ritualistic, we would not expect to see the level of organization that we do. Grammar is not decoration. Grammar is the architecture of meaning. And architecture, even in its simplest form, requires rules. At the site of Hohl Fels in Germany, archaeologists discovered a carved ivory flute, over 40,000 years old. But more intriguing than the flute itself are the marks on other objects found at the same site. Carved lines on bone fragments, notches arranged in sequences, patterns that repeat across multiple artifacts. Some of these patterns have been analyzed using statistical methods, the same methods used to analyze the structure of known languages. And the results are striking. The patterns are not random. They exhibit a degree of order, of non-randomness, that is consistent with structured information. One particularly intriguing example comes from a series of notched bones found across multiple European sites. The notches are small, deliberate, and often grouped in clusters of 5, 7, or 28. Researchers have suggested these may be lunar calendars, tracking the phases of the moon over the course of a month or a year. If this interpretation is correct, then these are not just marks. They are records, They are a way of encoding temporal information, of making time visible and trackable. And the ability to track time, to anticipate seasonal changes, to plan for the future, is one of the defining characteristics of human cognition. But even if the notches are not calendars, even if they represent something else entirely, the fact that they are structured, that they follow patterns, is significant. Structure implies intention. It implies a system. And a system, even a simple one, can carry meaning. Consider tally marks. 5 lines, the 5th crossing the first 4. This is a code. It is a way of representing quantity using a minimal set of symbols. It is a form of proto-mathematics, and it is also a form of proto-writing. The tally mark does not represent a sound. It represents a concept. 5. And if you can represent 5, you can represent 10, 20, many, few, more than, less than. You can begin to build a language of quantity, of relationship, of abstraction. There is evidence that such systems existed. At the site of Ishango, on the border between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, a bone tool was discovered, over 20,000 years old, covered in notches. The notches are organized into 3 columns, and the patterns within each column are mathematically intriguing. One column contains notches grouped in sets that correspond to the prime numbers between 10 and 20. Another column contains sets that double a given number. These are not random. These are mathematical patterns. And the person who carved them was thinking mathematically, was using marks to explore numerical relationships. This is abstract thought. This is symbolic manipulation. And it is far older than any written number system. Now imagine that the same cognitive capacity that allowed our ancestors to notch bones to track quantities also allowed them to create marks to represent other kinds of information. Not just how many, but what kind, where, when, who, why. Each of these questions can be answered with a symbol, a specific shape for a specific animal, a specific pattern for a specific location, a specific mark for a specific individual. Over time, these symbols could become more abstract, more conventionalized. A triangle might come to represent not just mountain, but high, difficult, sacred. A spiral might represent not just water, but life, cycle, return. The symbol becomes detached from its literal referent and begins to carry metaphorical, layered meaning. This is the birth of true language. And there are hints, faint but present, that such systems were developing. At the site of Gonnersdorf in Germany, engraved schist plaques dating back 15,000 years depict not only animals but also abstract signs. Lines, grids, chevrons, dots. These signs appear repeatedly, and they are often positioned in relation to the animal figures in ways that suggest they may be labels, identifiers, or qualifiers. This is a horse. This is a female horse. This is a horse we hunted. We cannot know for certain. But the spatial relationship between the abstract signs and the iconic images suggests a syntactic structure, a grammar of placement and association. Grammar does not have to be complex to be effective. Even the simplest rules can create a powerful system. Sign A next to sign B means X. Sign A above sign B means Y. This is syntax. This is structure. And if our ancestors were using even rudimentary syntax in their symbolic marks, then they were using language. Not spoken language, not written language as we know it, but language nonetheless. A visual, spatial, persistent language that could communicate across time and space without the need for sound. Let us also consider the role of repetition. In language, repetition is not just emphasis. It is a grammatical tool, pluralization, intensity, duration. In many early symbolic systems, repetition of a mark indicates quantity or magnitude. 3 lines mean more than 1 line. 5 dots mean more than 1 dot. This is a form of grammar, a way of modifying meaning through formal structure. And it appears again and again in the archaeological record. Rows of dots, sequences of lines, repeated patterns that clearly carry quantitative or qualitative information. And then there is the phenomenon of paired symbols. In several Paleolithic sites, certain symbols appear consistently in pairs. A circle paired with a line, a triangle paired with a dot, a crosshatch paired with a curve. The pairing is not random. It is deliberate. And pairing in language often indicates relationship. Subject and object, actor and action, modifier and modified. The grammar of relationship is one of the most fundamental aspects of language, and if our ancestors were using paired symbols to indicate relationships, then they were thinking grammatically. Of course, all of this is speculative. We are reading meaning into marks that may have had no linguistic function. We are imposing structure where there may have been only chaos. But the alternative, that tens of thousands of years of deliberate, structured, patterned mark-making meant nothing, communicated nothing, carried no information at all, that seems less plausible. Humans do not spend time and effort creating complex, repeated patterns unless those patterns serve a purpose. And the most obvious purpose for a repeated, structured pattern is communication. Part 8 Word count. 1000. Let us step back now and consider the broader implications. If humans did possess a form of symbolic communication, a proto-writing before the full development of speech, what does that tell us about the nature of language itself? What does it tell us about the human mind and about the path we took to become who we are? First, it tells us that language is not monolithic. There is no single language instinct that defines humanity. Language is a spectrum, a collection of interlocking capacities, gesture, symbol, sound, syntax, semantics, each of which can develop independently and each of which can function, to some degree, without the others. A deaf person can have full language through sign. A blind person can have full language through sound and touch. And perhaps, in the deep past, our ancestors had language through marks, through visual symbols that did not require vocalization. Second, it tells us that the human brain is extraordinarily flexible. It is not hardwired for speech alone. It is hardwired for meaning-making, for the creation and interpretation of symbols, regardless of the medium. This flexibility is one of our greatest strengths. It is why we can learn to read, even though reading is a recent cultural invention. It is why we can learn to code, to use mathematical notation, to interpret maps and diagrams. Our brains are symbol processing engines, and they can operate on any symbolic system we encounter. Speech is simply the most efficient, the most widely used. But it is not the only one. Third, it tells us that the story of human origins is far more complex and far more interesting than we have been led to believe. We are not simply the species that learned to talk. We are the species that learned to mean. And meaning can be made in 1,000 ways. The marks on the cave walls, the notches on the bones, the engravings on the ochre, these are all expressions of the same fundamental drive. The drive to make sense of the world, to share that sense with others, and to leave a trace that endures beyond the fleeting moment of our individual lives. But there is a darker implication as well. If symbolic communication predates speech, if our ancestors were using visual marks to convey meaning before they could speak, then what did we lose when speech became dominant? What forms of thought, what ways of knowing, were displaced by the tyranny of the voice? We live now in a world saturated with language, with words, with the constant stream of speech and text. But there are forms of knowledge, forms of experience, that cannot be captured in words. The visual, the spatial, the kinesthetic, these are marginalized in a language-dominated culture. We say, I can't put it into words, and we mean it is beyond language. But perhaps it is not beyond language. Perhaps it is simply beyond spoken language. Perhaps there are other languages, older languages, that we have forgotten. Indigenous cultures, particularly those that have maintained oral and visual traditions, often speak of knowledge that is held in the land, in the patterns of stars, in the shapes of stones, in the designs woven into cloth. This knowledge is not written down in the Western sense, but it is encoded. It is symbolic. It is language. And it is ancient. When we dismiss these forms of knowledge as primitive or preliterate, we are not recognizing our own limitation. We are not recognizing that our dependence on alphabetic writing has narrowed our concept of what language can be. The marks on the cave walls do not fit into our categories. They are not writing, but they are not writing either. They are something else, something older, something that exists in the space before writing and speech diverged, before the hand and the voice went their separate ways. And perhaps that is where the truth lies. Not in choosing between writing and speech, not in deciding which came first, but in recognizing that they were once intertwined, inseparable, part of a single, multimodal system of communication that allowed our ancestors to navigate a world we can barely imagine. Think about the silence. Not the silence we experience now, punctuated by engines and voices and the hum of electricity, but the deep silence of a world before machines, before cities, before the constant noise of human activity. In that silence, a mark on a tree, a cairn of stones, a symbol carved into a rock face, these were not small things. They were loud. They were the loudest things in the landscape. They shouted across the silence, saying, "This way, danger here, water there. We were here before you. You are not alone." In that world, marks were not supplementary. They were essential. They were the primary means of leaving messages that would outlast the moment, that would communicate across distance and time. And if they could do that, if they could carry meaning from one person to another, from one generation to the next, then they were language. Perhaps not the language we use now, but language nonetheless. And here is the final, unsettling thought. If marks could carry meaning before speech, if visual symbols were the first language, then perhaps the alphabet, the phonetic writing systems we use today, are not an advancement. Perhaps they are a compromise, a way of translating sound into marks, of forcing the voice onto the page. But what if there were other possibilities? What if there were forms of writing, forms of symbolic communication, that did not derive from speech, that operated on their own logic, their own grammar, their own rules? What would such a system look like? Could we even recognize it as language? Some researchers believe we already have examples. The quipus of the Inca, knotted strings that encoded numerical and possibly narrative information, are not phonetic. They do not represent sounds. They represent concepts directly. The quipus were a form of writing, but they were not derived from speech. They were an independent symbolic system, and they worked. For centuries, the Inca used quipus to run an empire, to keep records, to transmit information. They did not need an alphabet. They had something else. And perhaps, deep in our past, we had something else too. A system of marks, of symbols, of visual language that did not depend on the voice. A system that we used before we learned to speak or alongside our first, halting attempts at vocalization. A system that allowed us to think, to plan, to communicate, to become human. And then, gradually, as speech became more efficient, more flexible, more dominant, we let it go. We forgot it. But the marks remain. The evidence remains. And the question remains. Were we writing before we spoke? Part 9 word count. 1000. Let us sit with the ambiguity for a moment, because the honest answer is that we do not know. And perhaps we never will. The people who made these marks are gone. Their voices silent. Their intentions lost to time. We can analyze the patterns. We can measure the ages. We can compare the symbols across continents and cultures. But we cannot ask them what they meant. We cannot know with certainty if the lines and dots and curves were language or something else entirely. And perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps the value of these marks lies not in the answers they provide, but in the questions they raise. They force us to confront the limits of our knowledge. They force us to admit that the story of how we became human is still being written, still being revised, still being uncovered, one fragment at a time, from the layers of earth that hold our past. But let us entertain the possibility one more time. Let us imagine that the marks were language, that our ancestors did possess a form of symbolic communication before the full development of speech. If that is true, then the implications ripple outward in every direction. It means that language is older than we thought. It means that the human mind is more flexible, more creative, more adaptive than we have given it credit for. It means that the divide between literate and illiterate is not as clear as we once believed. And it means that there are forms of knowledge, forms of communication, that we have lost or overlooked, buried beneath the weight of our dependence on spoken and written words. Consider what it would mean for our understanding of cognitive evolution. If symbolic marks predate complex speech, then the selective pressures that drove the development of language were not primarily vocal. They were visual. They were spatial. They were about the ability to create, recognize, and interpret patterns. This shifts the entire framework. It means that the brain structures responsible for language, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, may have originally evolved to process visual symbols and only later became co-opted for processing sound. This is not a radical idea. Neuroscientists have long known that the brain is remarkably plastic, that functions can shift, that areas designed for one task can be repurposed for another. The reading brain, for instance, co-opts areas originally used for object recognition. Why couldn't the speaking brain have co-opted areas originally used for symbolic processing? There is also the question of what these marks reveal about the inner lives of our ancestors. We tend to think of early humans as simple, driven by basic needs, survival, food, shelter, reproduction. But the creation of symbols, particularly symbols that recur, that evolve, that seem to carry meaning, suggests an inner life far richer than mere survival. It suggests imagination. It suggests abstraction. It suggests the ability to conceive of things that are not immediately present, to think about the past, to plan for the future, to communicate about the invisible, the hypothetical, the sacred. And what about art? We have always assumed that art and language are separate, that the beautiful and the functional occupy different realms. But what if they were once the same? What if the first marks were both communication and expression, both symbol and beauty? The ochre engravings at Blombos, the geometric patterns on the Deepkloof eggshells, the painted dots in the caves of Spain, these are not ugly. They are elegant. They are aesthetically pleasing. They demonstrate a sensitivity to form, to symmetry, to rhythm. Perhaps our ancestors did not distinguish between art and language. Perhaps, for them, to make a mark that meant something was also to make a mark that was beautiful. And perhaps that unity, that fusion of meaning and beauty, is something we have lost. In our modern world, we separate. We have art galleries and libraries. We have poetry and prose. We have design and data. But in the beginning, perhaps there was no separation. Perhaps every mark was both a word and a picture, both a thought and a feeling, both a message and a gift. The hand that carved the crosshatch into the ochre was not thinking, "Am I making art or am I making language?" The hand was simply making. And the making itself was the meaning. There is a word in some indigenous Australian languages, Jukurpa, often translated as dreamtime. But Jukurpa is not just the past. It is the present. It is the ongoing creation of the world through story, through song, through mark. The landscape itself is a text, inscribed with meaning, and to read the landscape is to participate in the creation of reality. This is a worldview in which mark and meaning, land and language, are inseparable. And it is, perhaps, closer to the worldview of our Paleolithic ancestors than our own alphabetic, text-based culture. We have become so accustomed to thinking of language as a thing separate from the world, a tool we use to describe reality, that we have forgotten that language can also be reality. A mark on a stone is not just a representation of a boundary. It is the boundary. A symbol carved into a bone is not just a record of the moon. It is the moon made tangible, made holdable, made present. This is not metaphor. This is a different way of being in the world, a way in which the act of marking, of symbolizing, is itself a form of creation. And perhaps that is the deepest truth these ancient marks reveal. Not that our ancestors were trying to become like us, trying to develop the capacities we now possess, but that they were something else entirely. They were people who lived in a world where mark and meaning, symbol and reality, were not yet divided. And in that world, the act of making a mark was not just communication. It was magic. It was the power to bring something into being, to make the invisible visible, to give form to thought. And that power, that magic, is still with us. Every time we write a word, every time we draw a line, every time we create a symbol, we are participating in the same ancient act. We are reaching across the void between mind and matter, between self and other, and we are saying, this means something. This is real. And in that act, we are human. Not because we speak, not because we write, but because we mark, because we make meaning, because we reach. Part 10 word count. 1,000. So where does this leave us? Standing at the edge of a cave, looking at marks that are 70, 80, 90,000 years old, trying to decide if they are language or something else. Trying to decide if the first words were spoken or carved. Trying to understand what it means to be the kind of creature that cannot stop making marks, that cannot stop trying to mean something, even when there is no one to hear, no one to see, no one to understand. The plot we have traced is not a straight line. It is a spiral. It begins with symbols older than we thought possible, marks that predate the full anatomical capacity for speech. It escalates as we compare these marks across continents, across cultures, across tens of thousands of years, and find eerie similarities, patterns that recur, structures that suggest intention. It deepens as we examine the grammar-like patterns, the sequences, the pairings, the repetitions, and realize that these marks are not random. They are organized. They are structured. They are, in some sense, linguistic. It goes global as we recognize that this is not a localized phenomenon. This is human. Wherever humans went, they made marks. And finally, it ends not with certainty but with ambiguity. We do not know if these marks were language. We do not know if they were proto-writing. We do not know if they were communication or art or ritual or something we do not have a word for. But we know they were intentional. We know they mattered. And we know they are part of us. If you are still listening, if you have made it this far with me, then you are part of a lineage that stretches back into the dark. You are descended from people who carved lines into ochre, who hammered cupules into stone, who painted their bodies and their caves and their bones with symbols that we can still see but can no longer read. You carry their capacity in your brain. You carry their impulse in your hands. Every time you write your name, every time you draw a picture, every time you trace a pattern in the sand or the frost, you are echoing them. You are continuing the conversation they began. And the conversation is not over. It is still unfolding. Every new discovery, every new sight, every new analysis adds another layer to the story. The marks do not give up their secrets easily. They are patient. They have been waiting for tens of thousands of years. They can wait a little longer. But we are getting closer. We are learning to ask the right questions. We are learning to see patterns we once overlooked. We are learning slowly to read the language of the deep past. Or perhaps we are learning to remember. Because if these marks were language, if our ancestors did write before they spoke, then we are not discovering something new. We are rediscovering something old. We are remembering a capacity we once had, a way of thinking and communicating that we have buried beneath layers of speech and text. And remembrance is a strange thing. It is not the same as learning. It is not the acquisition of new information. It is the uncovering of something that was always there, dormant, waiting to be awakened. Think of the marks not as messages from the past but as seeds. Seeds planted deep in the soil of time, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. And perhaps now the conditions are right. Perhaps, after millennia of dominance by spoken language, we are finally ready to recognize that there are other languages, older languages, languages of symbol and mark and image. Perhaps the digital age, with its icons and emojis and visual interfaces, is not a departure from language but a return. A return to a way of communicating that is more immediate, more visceral, more direct than words. A return to the marks. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the marks will remain silent, beautiful but unreadable, evidence of a capacity we once had and lost, or a capacity we never fully developed. Perhaps we will never know for certain if they were language. Perhaps the ambiguity is the point. Perhaps the value of the marks lies not in what they tell us but in what they refuse to tell us, in the way they force us to sit with uncertainty, to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge, to accept that there are questions we cannot answer, mysteries we cannot solve, silences we cannot fill. And there is a kind of peace in that, a recognition that we are not the masters of history, not the possessors of all truth, not the final word in the story of what it means to be human. We are simply travelers, moving through time, picking up fragments, piecing together what we can, and passing the puzzle on to those who come after. The marks are part of that puzzle. They are pieces we have found, pieces we are still trying to understand. And perhaps one day someone will understand. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the marks will always be, in some essential way, beyond our reach. And that is okay. because the reaching itself is what matters. If you have listened this far, if you have traveled with me into this deep, uncertain territory, then I want to thank you. I want to acknowledge that you are curious, that you are willing to sit with questions that have no easy answers, that you are drawn to the kind of history that does not fit neatly into textbooks, that resists simple narratives, that demands patience and humility and wonder. That takes a certain kind of courage. And I honor it. Tell me, where are you listening from? Are you in a quiet room, the world outside held at bay? Are you driving through the night, the headlights carving a path through darkness? Are you lying in bed, your mind drifting as your body settles into sleep? Wherever you are part of this now. You are part of the conversation. You are part of the lineage. And your presence matters. Because the marks are not just about the past. They are about the future. They are about what we will become, what capacities we will rediscover, what forms of communication we will create. We are standing at a threshold, between the world of speech and the world of symbol, between the alphabet and the icon, between the voice and the mark. And we do not yet know which way we will go, or if we need to choose at all. Perhaps we can be both. Perhaps we can hold the voice and the mark together, the sound and the symbol, the spoken and the written, and create something new, something that honors the full spectrum of what it means to be human. The marks on the cave walls were made by hands like yours. The minds that conceived them were minds like yours. The impulse to create, to communicate, to mean something, that impulse is the same. Across time, across space, across the silent gulf that separates us from our ancestors. We are still marking. We are still reaching. We are still trying to say, I am here. I thought. I existed. Remember me. And we do. We remember. Not in detail. Not in specifics. But in the deep structures of our minds, in the capacity we carry to create and interpret symbols, in the drive we feel to make marks that mean something. The ancestors live on in us. Not as ghosts, but as grammar, as structure, as the possibility of language itself. Part 11 word count. 1000. Let us linger a moment longer on the threshold, on the space between knowing and not knowing, between speech and silence, between mark and meaning. Because this is where the mystery lives. This is where the questions are sharpest, most alive, most urgent. If the marks were language, then language is older than we thought. If they were not language, then what were they? And why can't we tell the difference? Perhaps the problem is with our definition of language itself. We have been trained to think of language in narrow terms. Words, sentences, grammar, syntax, semantics. But what if language is broader than that? What if language is any system that allows one mind to transmit meaning to another? If that is the definition, then the marks are language. Absolutely, unquestionably, they transmit something. We may not know what, but the intent to transmit is visible in the repetition, in the structure, in the care taken to create them. The marks are not accidents. They are acts of communication. But there is a deeper question. Can something be language if it is not decoded? If a mark carries meaning, but there is no one left who knows how to read it, does the meaning still exist? Or does meaning require both a sender and a receiver, both an encoder and a decoder? This is not an idle philosophical question. It cuts to the heart of what language is. Is language in the marks themselves, embedded in their structure, waiting to be discovered? Or is language in the relationship between the marks and the minds that interpret them, a dynamic, living process that dies when the last reader dies? The marks on the cave walls are mute now. They have been mute for tens of thousands of years. But they were not always mute. Once, someone stood before them and understood. Once, the mark spoke. And the silence we experience now is not the absence of language. It is the absence of the relationship that made language possible. The marks have not changed. We have lost the key. We have forgotten the code. And so the marks, though they remain, though they persist, no longer speak. They wait. They wait for someone to remember. And perhaps that is the real story here. Not the invention of language but the loss of it. Not the creation of marks but the forgetting of what they meant. Human history is not a story of constant progress, of steady accumulation, of moving from darkness to light. It is a story of cycles, of creation and loss, of remembering and forgetting. Civilizations rise and fall. Languages are born and die. Knowledge is discovered and then lost. And the marks, silent on the cave walls, are evidence of a loss so profound we can barely comprehend it. They are evidence that we once knew something, once communicated something, once thought in ways that we can no longer access. This is unsettling. It is unsettling because it challenges the narrative we have built about ourselves. We are Homo sapiens, the wise ones, the ones who know. We are the apex, the culmination, the most advanced species that has ever lived. But the marks suggest otherwise. They suggest that there were forms of knowledge, forms of communication, that we have lost. They suggest that the path of human history is not a straight line upward but a meandering, branching, recursive path, full of dead ends and forgotten routes. And if we have lost things before, what else might we lose? What else have we already lost without even knowing it? There is a concept in anthropology called cultural extinction. It refers to the loss of knowledge, practices, languages, and ways of life when a culture disappears. But what we are talking about here is deeper than cultural extinction. This is cognitive extinction, the loss of entire modes of thought, entire ways of being human, that existed once and exist no longer. The marks are fossils of a mind that is extinct. And we, who carry the biological descendants of those minds, who carry the same brain structures, the same capacities, cannot access what they accessed. We cannot think what they thought. We have evolved, yes, but we have also diminished. And yet there is something else. There is the fact that we are here now looking at the marks trying to understand them. There is the fact that the impulse to interpret, to decode, to recover meaning is as strong in us as the impulse to create meaning was in them. We are not content to let the marks remain silent. We probe. We analyze. We hypothesize. We use every tool at our disposal, radiocarbon dating, statistical analysis, comparative mythology, neuroimaging, to try to unlock the secrets of the past. And in that effort, in that reaching backward across time, we are engaging in the same fundamental act that created the marks in the first place. We are trying to connect. We are trying to bridge the gap. We are trying to say, I see you. I acknowledge you. You are not forgotten. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the marks do not need to be decoded to fulfill their function. Perhaps their function is not to transmit specific information but to transmit presence. To say, we were here, we thought, we made meaning, and we, by looking at them, by wondering about them, by refusing to dismiss them as mere decoration, are saying back, we see you, we hear you, you matter. And in that exchange, across the abyss of millennia, language is restored. Not the language of the marks themselves, but the language of acknowledgement, of recognition, of shared humanity. This is not a small thing. In a world that is increasingly fragmented, increasingly disconnected, increasingly dominated by the ephemeral and the superficial, the marks remind us of something essential. They remind us that communication is not just about transmitting information. It is about presence. It is about connection. It is about the simple, profound act of reaching out and saying, I am here. Are you there? And the answer, echoing across the silence of 70,000 years, is yes. We are here. We are listening. We are reaching back. Part 12 word count. 1,000. Let us return now to the central question, the one that has haunted us throughout this journey. What if humans had a written language before speech fully evolved? What if the marks came first? What if the hand spoke before the voice? The answer, as with all profound questions, is not simple. It is not yes or no. It is both and neither. It is a spectrum. It is a process. It is a story still being told. The marks are evidence of something, but that something is ambiguous, multifaceted, resistant to easy categorization. They are communication, yes. But are they language? That depends on how we define language. And how we define language depends, ultimately, on how we define ourselves. If language is the capacity to create and interpret symbols, to assign meaning to marks, to structure those marks in ways that allow meaning to be transmitted across time and space, then yes, the marks are language. They are the earliest language. They are the foundation upon which all later systems, spoken and written, were built. But if language requires vocalization, if it requires the specific phonetic structures of speech, then no, the marks are not language. They are proto-language, or pre-language, or paralanguage. They are something adjacent to language, something that enabled language but not language itself. But I would argue that this distinction is artificial. I would argue that we have allowed our dependence on spoken language to narrow our understanding of what language can be. We have made speech the standard against which all other forms of communication are measured. And in doing so, we have marginalized the visual, the gestural, the symbolic. We have created a hierarchy in which spoken language is primary and everything else is secondary, derivative, lesser. But the marks challenge that hierarchy. They suggest that the visual came first, or at least alongside the vocal. They suggest that the hand and the voice developed in tandem, each influencing the other, each enabling the other, until they diverged and speech became dominant. And if that is true, then the question is not, did we write before we spoke? But, why did speech become dominant? What was it about vocal language that gave it such a powerful selective advantage that it eclipsed visual symbolic communication? The answer, I think, is efficiency and flexibility. Speech is fast. It is real-time. It allows for rapid, complex, nuanced interaction in a way that marks do not. You can speak in the dark. You can speak while your hands are busy. You can speak to many people at once. And speech, because it is ephemeral, does not require the permanence, the commitment, the labor of creating marks. It is lighter. It is more adaptable. And in a world where survival often depends on quick decisions, fast reactions, and flexible responses, speech would have been an enormous advantage. But we should not mistake dominance for superiority. Speech is efficient, yes, but it is also limited. It is constrained by time. It is constrained by presence. You can only speak to someone who is there, in that moment, within earshot. Marks, on the other hand, persist. They can communicate across time. They can communicate to people who are not yet born. They are slower, yes, but they are also more enduring. And endurance is a form of power. What we lost when speech became dominant was not the capacity for visual symbolic communication. We did not lose the ability to make marks, to create symbols, to think visually. We still do those things, but we lost the centrality of it. We lost the sense that marks are as valid, as important, as primary a form of language as speech. And we lost, perhaps, some of the ways of thinking that were unique to a visual symbolic mode of communication. There are thoughts that can be thought in images that cannot be thought in words. There are relationships that can be seen in patterns that cannot be heard in sounds. And when we made speech primary, we may have closed off access to those thoughts, those relationships, those ways of knowing. But here is the hopeful part. We can recover them. We can, if we choose, relearn the language of the marks. Not by decoding the specific symbols of the Paleolithic, though that would be a triumph if we could, but by reawakening the capacity for visual symbolic thought, by recognizing that marks, images, patterns, and symbols are not inferior to words but different, equally valid, equally powerful. The digital age, for all its flaws, is pushing us in that direction. We are becoming more visual again. We communicate in images, in emojis, in memes. We create infographics, diagrams, visual metaphors. We are, in a sense, returning to the marks. And perhaps that return is not a regression but a reintegration, a reclaiming of capacities we never fully lost, only set aside. Imagine a future in which speech and symbol, voice and mark are fully integrated. A future in which we do not privilege one over the other but use both, fluidly, seamlessly, depending on the context, the need, the message. A future in which children learn to read images as fluently as they read words, to think in patterns as easily as they think in sentences. This is not fantasy. This is possibility. And the marks on the cave walls, ancient and silent as they are, point the way. They say, "You did this once. You can do it again." So what if humans had a written language before speech fully evolved? What if the marks came first? Then we are not the culmination of a single path. We are the heirs of multiple paths, multiple capacities, multiple ways of being human. And the path forward is not to choose one over the other but to honor all of them, to reclaim the fullness of what it means to be a creature that marks, that speaks, that gestures, that sings, that creates meaning in 1,000 forms. The marks are not a curiosity. They are not a footnote. They are a foundation, and we are still building on it. Tell me, where are you now? Are you still listening? Are you drifting towards sleep, your mind loosening, the boundaries between thought and dream beginning to blur? That is okay. That is what this is for. Let the questions settle into you. Let the images of the marks, the ancient hands, the patient stones, sink into the quiet places of your mind. You do not need to answer. You do not need to understand. You only need to receive. And in the morning or whenever you wake, something will remain. Not a fact, not a conclusion, but a sense. A sense that the story is longer, deeper, stranger than you were told. A sense that you are part of something ancient and ongoing. A sense that the marks are still speaking, if only you know how to listen. Part 13 word count. 1,000 we have wandered far, you and I, through caves and deserts, through time and symbol, through silence and the echoes of meaning. We have looked at marks that are older than empires, older than cities, older than agriculture. We have entertained the possibility that these marks are not just art, not just decoration, but language. A language that came before speech or alongside it, a language of the hand and the eye, a language that does not require sound to convey meaning. And we have asked, again and again, what it means if this is true. What it means for our understanding of human nature, of language, of the path we took to become who we are. But now, as we approach the end, as the story begins to circle back on itself, as the questions settle into a kind of quiet resolution, or at least resignation, I want to offer one final thought. One final way of looking at the marks that does not require us to decide if they were language or not. Because perhaps the most important thing about the marks is not what they were but what they are. Not what they meant to the people who made them but what they mean to us. Now, looking back across the abyss of time, the marks are witnesses. They are evidence that long before we built cities, before we domesticated plants and animals, before we invented writing as we know it, we were thinking symbolically. We were creating meaning. We were communicating. We were human in the deepest sense. And that humanness, that capacity for symbolic thought, for the creation and interpretation of meaning, is not a recent development. It is not a product of civilization. It is ancient. It is primal. It is woven into the very fabric of what we are. And the marks remind us of that. They remind us that we are not the first. That the impulse to make meaning, to leave a trace, to say, I was here, is as old as consciousness itself. And they remind us that we are connected, across time, across culture, across the vast distances that separate us from our ancestors, by this simple, profound act. The act of marking. The act of making something that means something. The act of reaching out, across the silence, and saying, I am here. Are you there? And the answer always is yes. The marks are there. The ancestors are there, not as ghosts but as traces, as evidence, as presence. And we, by looking at the marks, by trying to understand them, by refusing to let them disappear into the silence, we are there too. We are part of the conversation. We are part of the lineage. We are continuing the work that began in the Paleolithic and will continue, in forms we cannot yet imagine, into the future. This is not a story about the past. It is a story about the present. It is a story about who we are right now in this moment. We are the descendants of people who made marks. We are the inheritors of their capacity for symbolic thought. And we are, whether we realize it or not, still making marks. Every word we write, every image we create, every symbol we use, is a continuation of that ancient act. We are marking the world. We are making meaning. We are saying, I am here. And that, perhaps, is the answer to the question we began with. What if humans had a written language before speech fully evolved? The answer is that it doesn't matter. Not in the way we think. It doesn't matter because the distinction between writing and speech, between mark and sound, is less important than the underlying capacity they both express. The capacity for meaning. The capacity for connection. the capacity to create something that outlasts the moment, that bridges the gap between one mind and another, between one generation and the next. That capacity is what makes us human. And it is ancient. The marks are not a mystery to be solved. They are a gift to be received. They are a reminder of what we are, of what we have always been, of what we will always be. Creatures who mark. Creatures who mean. Creatures who reach. And in that reaching, in that endless, restless reaching, we find not answers but something better. We find connection. We find continuity. We find the knowledge that we are not alone, that we have never been alone, that the marks are there, silent and patient, waiting for us to see them, to acknowledge them, to continue the conversation they began. So let us honor the marks. Let us honor the people who made them. Let us honor the capacity they represent, the ancient, enduring, indomitable drive to make meaning, to communicate, to connect. And let us carry that capacity forward, into the future, knowing that whatever forms language takes, whatever technologies we invent, whatever new ways of communicating we discover, the essence remains the same. The reaching, the marking, the saying, I am here. I thought, I existed. Remember me. And we will. We do. We remember. Part 14 word count. 1000. There is a kind of peace that comes with ambiguity, with sitting in the space between knowing and not knowing, between certainty and mystery. It is not the peace of resolution, of questions answered and problems solved. It is the peace of acceptance, of acknowledging that there are things we cannot know, questions we cannot answer, silences we cannot fill. And there is a kind of beauty in that, a kind of grace. The marks will not give up their secrets easily. Perhaps they will never give them up at all. And perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps the value of the marks lies not in what they tell us but in what they withhold, in the way they force us to confront the limits of our knowledge, the fragility of our narratives, the provisional nature of everything we think we know. We are not the masters of history. We are its students and often not very good ones. We misread. We misinterpret. We project our own assumptions onto the past and mistake them for truth. But the marks, patient and silent, do not correct us. They simply wait. They wait for us to get better at listening. And listening is hard. It requires humility. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to sit with uncertainty, to let go of the need for closure, to accept that some questions do not have answers. This is not a skill we are taught in the modern world. We are taught to seek answers, to solve problems, to move forward. But the marks teach a different lesson. They teach us to be still, to be present, to look without demanding, to listen without insisting on a response. This is the lesson of the deep past. This is what the marks, in their silence, convey. They say, we are here. We have always been here. We will always be here. And we do not need to be understood to be valued. We do not need to be decoded to be meaningful. We simply are. And in their being, in their persistence, in their refusal to disappear despite the passage of millennia, they offer us something precious. They offer us continuity. They offer us the knowledge that the human story is long, far longer than our individual lives, far longer than our civilizations, far longer than our certainties. And they offer us a place in that story, a place not as conquerors or masters but as participants, as contributors, as links in a chain that stretches back into the dark and forward into the unknown. If you have made it this far, if you are still here with me, then you have done something rare. You have given your attention, your time, your curiosity to something that offers no easy answers, no simple takeaways, no practical applications. You have walked with me into the deep past, into the silence, into the mystery. And that takes courage. It takes a willingness to value the question over the answer, the journey over the destination, the mystery over the solution. And for that, I thank you. But I also want to challenge you. I want to ask you to take this further. I want to ask you to look around your own life, your own world, and ask, what marks am I making? What meaning am I creating? What am I leaving behind? Because the marks on the cave walls were not made by people who thought they were doing something extraordinary. They were made by people who were simply living, simply being, simply trying to navigate the world as best they could. And yet, 70,000 years later, we are here, looking at what they made, trying to understand, trying to connect. What you do now, the marks you make, the meanings you create, may not seem significant. But you do not know who will find them, who will look at them, who will try to understand. You do not know what your marks will mean 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now. So make them with care. Make them with intention. Make them in the knowledge that you are part of a lineage, that you are carrying forward a capacity that is ancient and precious, that you are contributing to a story that began long before you and will continue long after you are gone. You are not the beginning. You are not the end. You are the middle. You are the link. And that is enough. The marks on the cave walls were made by hands like yours. Fingers that could grip, manipulate, create. Minds that could imagine, plan, symbolize. Hearts that could hope, fear, love, grieve. They were human in all the ways that matter. And you are their descendant. You carry their DNA. You carry their capacity. You carry their legacy. And that legacy is not a burden. It is a gift of possibility, of potential, of connection. So as we come to the end of this journey, as the story circles back to where it began, as the questions settle into a kind of quiet resonance, I want to leave you with one final image. Imagine a hand, ancient and weathered, holding a piece of ochre. The hand presses the ochre against the stone, and a line appears. Red against gray. Simple, deliberate, intentional. The hand lifts. The line remains. And in that moment, in the space between the making and the remaining, language is born. Not spoken, not written, but present, real, powerful. And now imagine your own hand, holding a pen, a brush, a stylus, a tool. You press it to the page, to the screen, to the world, and a mark appears. And in that mark, in that simple, deliberate, intentional act, you are continuing the work that began in the Paleolithic. You are making meaning. You are creating connection. You are saying, I am here, and somewhere someone will see it. Someone will understand. Someone will answer, I am here too. And in that exchange, across time, across space, across the silence, language is restored. Not as information, not as data, but as presence, as connection, as the simple, profound act of reaching out and being met. This is what the marks teach us. This is what the marks give us. And this is what we, in turn, must give forward. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making this journey with me. May your marks be intentional. May your meanings be clear. May your reaching be met. And may you rest now, knowing that you are part of a story far larger, far deeper, far more beautiful than you can imagine. Sleep well. Dream of marks. Dream of meaning. Dream of the ancient hands that reached across the silence and said, I am here. And when you wake, reach back. Make your mark. Continue the conversation. Good night. Part 15 word count. 1,000. And yet, even now, even as we prepare to step back from the cave, to leave the marks behind, to return to the world of speech and sound and the relentless forward motion of the present, there is one more thing that must be said. One more layer to peel back. One more question to sit with before we go. If the marks were language, if they came before speech or alongside it, then what does that say about the nature of thought itself? Because language is not just a tool for communication. It is a tool for thinking. The words we use shape the thoughts we can have. The structures of grammar determine the structures of logic. And if our ancestors were thinking in marks, in visual symbols, in spatial patterns, before they were thinking in words, then their thoughts would have been different from ours. Not lesser, not simpler, but different, operating on different principles, following different logics, accessing different kinds of truth. Visual thinking is not the same as verbal thinking. When you think in images, in patterns, in spatial relationships, you are engaging different parts of the brain, accessing different kinds of information. You can see relationships that are invisible in words. You can grasp wholes that cannot be broken into parts. You can think in layers, in simultaneity, in ways that linear, sequential, word-based thought cannot replicate. And if our ancestors were thinking visually, using marks as the scaffolding for their thoughts, then they were capable of insights, understandings, ways of knowing that we, trapped in the linearity of speech, can no longer access. This is not romantic nostalgia. This is neuroscience. We know that the brain is lateralized, that the left hemisphere specializes in sequential, analytical, language-based processing, while the right hemisphere specializes in holistic, spatial, image-based processing. We know that, in most modern humans, the left hemisphere is dominant, at least when it comes to language. But it was not always so. Before the development of complex speech, before the full lateralization of language function, the brain would have been more balanced, more integrated. And the kinds of thoughts that could emerge from that more integrated brain would have been different. Richer in some ways, more holistic, more connected to the body, to the environment, to the immediate sensory experience of being in the world. And perhaps that is what we lost. Not language, not communication, but a way of thinking that was more embodied, more immediate, more connected. A way of thinking that did not abstract, did not analyze, did not divide the world into categories and hierarchies, but simply experienced, perceived, and expressed. The marks are evidence of that way of thinking. They are not abstractions. They are presences. They are not symbols in the sense that words are symbols, arbitrary signs that stand for something else. They are more direct. A line is a line. A curve is a curve. The mark does not represent the world. It is part of the world. And the mind that made it was perhaps more fully part of the world than ours is. We have gained much in the development of complex language. We have gained the ability to think abstractly, to plan for the distant future, to communicate complex ideas, to build civilizations. But we have also lost something. We have lost immediacy. We have lost connection. We have lost the sense that we are not separate from the world but embedded in it, continuous with it, shaped by it and shaping it in turn. The marks remind us of that loss. And they remind us that it does not have to be permanent. We can, if we choose, reintegrate. We can learn to think in images as well as words. We can learn to use both hemispheres, both modes, both languages. We can become, in a sense, more fully human. This is the promise of the marks. Not that they will tell us what our ancestors thought, but that they will teach us how to think differently ourselves. They are not a code to be cracked. They are a door to be opened. A door that leads not back into the past but forward into a future in which we have reclaimed capacities we set aside, in which we have reintegrated parts of ourselves that were fragmented, in which we have become, once again, whole. And perhaps that is the real reason we are drawn to the marks, why we cannot stop looking at them, studying them, trying to understand them. It is not just curiosity. It is not just the desire to solve a puzzle. It is something deeper. It is the recognition, however faint, however subconscious, that the marks represent something we have lost and something we need. They represent a way of being in the world that is more integrated, more balanced, more whole. And we hunger for that. We hunger for connection, for immediacy, for the sense that we are part of something larger than ourselves. And the marks, in their silence, in their presence, in their refusal to be anything other than what they are, offer us a glimpse of that possibility. So perhaps the question is not, what if humans had a written language before speech fully evolved? But, what if we could reclaim that language now? What if we could learn, again, to think in marks, in images, in patterns? What if we could reintegrate the visual and the verbal, the spatial and the sequential, the intuitive and the analytical? What if we could become, once again, creatures of both the hand and the voice, of both the mark and the word? This is not a call to abandon speech. It is not a call to return to some imagined Paleolithic Eden. It is a call to expand, to reclaim, to integrate. It is a call to recognize that we are more than our words, that language is more than speech, that thought is more than logic. It is a call to honor the full spectrum of our capacities, to value the visual as much as the verbal, the intuitive as much as the rational, the embodied as much as the abstract. The marks are waiting. They have been waiting for tens of thousands of years. They are patient, and they are not asking us to decode them. They are asking us to remember that we are more than we think we are, to remember that the capacity for symbolic thought, for visual language, for holistic, integrated, embodied knowing, is still within us. It has always been within us. We have only to reach for it. So reach. Make your marks. Think in images. Trust the patterns you see, the connections you feel, the meanings that emerge not from words but from shapes, from colors, from the spatial relationships of things in the world. You do not need to understand. You do not need to explain. You only need to be present, to be open, to allow the marks to speak in their own language in their own time. And when they do, when the silence finally breaks and the meaning emerges, you will recognize it. Not as something new, but as something old. Something you have always known but forgot. Something that has been waiting deep in the structures of your mind for you to remember. Remember. Part 16 word count. 1000. So we return now to the silence, to the cave, to the marks. We return not with answers but with acceptance. We accept that we do not know if the marks were language. We accept that we may never know. We accept that the silence is part of the message, that the mystery is part of the meaning. And in that acceptance we find something unexpected. We find peace. We find connection. We find ourselves, not as the solvers of puzzles but as participants in a story that is still unfolding, still being written, still reaching forward into the unknown. The marks are not endpoints. They are beginnings. They are invitations. They are doorways. And when we stand before them, when we look at them with open eyes and open minds, we are not just looking at the past. We are looking into the future. We are seeing possibilities. We are seeing what we might become if we allow ourselves to remember, to reintegrate, to reclaim the full spectrum of what it means to be human. And what does it mean to be human? It means to mark. It means to make meaning. It means to reach across the silence and say, I am here. I thought. I existed. It means to honor the past, to engage with the present, and to shape the future. It means to be both the hand that carves the line and the eye that sees it, both the mind that creates meaning and the heart that feels it. It means to be whole. The marks teach us this. They teach us that language is not one thing but many things. They teach us that communication is not just about transmitting information but about creating connection. They teach us that the deepest truths are not always spoken, not always written, but sometimes simply shown, marked, made visible. And they teach us that we are not alone, that we have never been alone, that the human story is a long, continuous conversation, reaching backward and forward through time, connecting us to those who came before and those who will come after. This is not a small lesson. This is not a minor insight. This is fundamental. This is the ground on which everything else stands. And the marks, silent and patient on the cave walls, are the evidence. They are the proof. They are the testimony of minds that thought, hands that created, hearts that felt, lives that mattered. And they call to us, across the abyss of time, to remember, to honor, to continue. So as this journey comes to an end, as the words begin to fade and the silence returns, I want to leave you with a final challenge. Not a question this time, not a mystery, but a task, practice, a way of being in the world. Go out and make marks, not random marks, not idle marks, but intentional marks. Marks that mean something. Marks that say, I am here. I thought. I existed. It doesn't matter what form the marks take. They can be words. They can be images. They can be patterns, symbols, lines, curves, dots. They can be carved, painted, drawn, written, typed, printed. They can be permanent or ephemeral, large or small, public or private. What matters is the intention. What matters is the reaching. What matters is the connection. And when you make your marks, think of the ancestors. Think of the hands that pressed ochre into stone. Think of the minds that conceived patterns, that saw relationships, that created meanings. Think of the lineage you are part of, the story you are continuing. And know that your marks, however small, however personal, however temporary, are part of that story. They are contributions. They are offerings. They are links in the chain. And think, too, of those who will come after. Think of the people 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, who might find your marks, who might look at them and wonder, who might try to understand, who might see in them evidence of a mind that thought, a hand that created, a life that mattered. You are making the archaeological record of the future. You are leaving the traces that future humans, or future intelligences, will study, interpret, puzzle over. What do you want those traces to say? What meaning do you want to leave behind? This is not a burden. This is a gift. This is the opportunity to participate, consciously and intentionally, in the great human project of making meaning, of creating connection, of reaching across time and space to say, I am here. And in that reaching, in that marking, in that act of creation, you are fulfilling the deepest, most ancient impulse of the human mind. You are doing what your ancestors did. You are doing what the people who made the marks on the cave walls did. You are being human. So go, make your marks, and know that you are not alone. You are part of a lineage that stretches back into the mists of time and forward into the unknown future. You are a link in the chain. You are a voice in the conversation. You are a mark in the great tapestry of human meaning-making. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for your patience, your curiosity, your willingness to sit with questions that have no easy answers. Thank you for your presence. And thank you, most of all, for being willing to reach, to mark, to make meaning. The world needs your marks. The future needs your marks. And the ancestors, silent on the cave walls, are waiting for you to continue the conversation they began. Make your mark. Leave your trace. Be part of the story. And know that, in doing so, you are honoring the past, engaging with the present, and shaping the future. You are being fully, completely, beautifully human. Good night. Rest well. And when you wake, reach. Mark. Mean something. The cave is waiting. The silence is waiting. The story is waiting. For you. Part 17 word count. 1,000. But before we leave the cave entirely, before we step back into the light and the noise and the relentless forward motion of the present, let us take one more moment. One more breath. One more look at the marks. Because there is something we have not yet said. Something that has been present throughout this entire journey but never quite spoken aloud. And it is this: the marks are not just about the past or the future. They are about now. They are about this moment. They are about you here, listening, thinking, feeling. They are about the space between the words, the silence between the breaths, the pause between one thought and the next. They are about presence. Presence is the most difficult thing to achieve in the modern world. We are always distracted, always elsewhere, always thinking about what comes next or what came before. We are never here. We are never now. But the marks demand presence. They demand that we stop, that we look, that we be still. They demand that we give them our attention, our full attention, not because they will reward us with answers but because attention itself is the gift. Attention is the act of honoring, of valuing, of saying, this matters. You matter. This moment matters. And in giving our attention to the marks, we are not just honoring the past. We are honoring ourselves. We are acknowledging our own capacity for wonder, for curiosity, for the deep, sustained engagement that allows meaning to emerge. We are practicing presence. And presence, the ability to be fully here, fully now, fully engaged, is the foundation of everything that matters. It is the foundation of creativity, of connection, of love, of wisdom. It is the foundation of being human. The marks teach us this. They teach us to slow down, to be still, to look without demanding, to listen without insisting, to allow meaning to emerge in its own time, in its own way. This is not a passive act. This is not resignation or apathy. This is active receptivity. This is the discipline of being present, of being open, of being willing to receive whatever is offered without trying to control or manipulate or force. And it is hard. It is one of the hardest things we can do, but it is also one of the most important. So as you listen to these final words, as the story winds down and the silence begins to creep back in, I want to invite you to practice presence. Just for a moment, just for the space of a few breaths. Let go of the questions. Let go of the need to understand. Let go of the urge to analyze or categorize or explain. Just be here. Just be now. Just be present with the marks, with the mystery, with the silence. And notice what happens. Notice what emerges when you stop trying to grasp and simply allow yourself to receive. You might feel nothing. You might feel everything. You might feel a sense of connection, of continuity, of being part of something larger than yourself. You might feel grief for what has been lost, hope for what might be recovered, wonder at the sheer improbability of your existence, here, now, in this moment. Or you might simply feel the weight of your body, the rhythm of your breath, the quiet hum of consciousness doing what it does, moment by moment, breath by breath. Whatever you feel, it is enough. It is more than enough. It is real. It is yours. And it is part of the conversation that the marks began. Because the marks are not just about the past. They are about this moment, this breath, this awareness, this presence. And in being present, in being fully here, you are completing the circuit. You are closing the loop. You are answering the call that was sent out 70,000 years ago by a hand that pressed ochre into stone and said, I am here. Are you there? And you are here. You are present. You are witnessing. And that is everything. There is a poem, ancient and anonymous, that says, we are the ones we have been waiting for. And it is true. The ancestors, the people who made the marks, they were not waiting for some distant future to come and decode their symbols. They were not waiting for us to arrive and unlock their secrets. They were simply living, simply being, simply doing what humans do, which is to mark, to mean, to reach. And we, here now, are doing the same. We are not the culmination. We are not the endpoint. We are simply the continuation. We are the next mark in the sequence. The next note in the song, the next breath in the long, continuous exhale of human consciousness, reaching out into the world and saying, I am here, and that is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough. So rest now. Let the marks settle into you. Let the questions dissolve. Let the mystery remain mystery. And know that you are part of the story. You are part of the lineage. You are part of the great, ongoing conversation that is human meaning-making. You are here. You are present. You are real. And the marks, silent on the cave walls, are smiling. They have been waiting for you, not to decode them, not to solve them, but simply to see them, to acknowledge them, to honor them. And you have done that. You have been present. You have been witness. And that is the greatest gift you can give. Not just to the marks, not just to the ancestors, but to yourself. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to walk into the silence and sit with the mystery. Thank you for your presence. And now rest, sleep, dream. And when you wake, carry the marks with you. Carry the silence. Carry the mystery. Carry the knowledge that you are part of something ancient and ongoing and endlessly fascinating. Carry the awareness that your marks matter, that your meanings matter, that your presence matters. You are the ones you have been waiting for. You are the ones the ancestors were reaching toward. You are the ones the future is waiting to meet. So make your marks. Make them well. Make them true. Make them with intention and care and presence. And know that, in doing so, you are honoring the past, engaging the present, and shaping the future. You are human. You mark. You mean. You matter. And that is the only truth that has ever mattered. Good night. Sleep well. And may your dreams be filled with marks, with meanings, with the ancient hands that reached across the silence and found, at last, that someone was listening. Someone was there. You. Part 18 word count. 1000. The journey ends where it began. In the dark. In the silence. In the cave. But you are not the same as when you entered. Something has shifted. Something has changed. Not in the marks. They are the same as they have always been, patient and silent, waiting on the walls. But in you, in the way you see, in the way you listen, in the way you hold the mystery, you came seeking answers. You came with questions. What if humans had a written language before speech fully evolved? What if the marks came first? What if the hand spoke before the voice? And you have been given not answers but something better. You have been given depth. You have been given nuance. You have been given the understanding that the truth is not simple, not singular, not final. The truth is layered, complex, ongoing. The truth is that we do not know, and that not knowing is not a failure. It is an opening. It is an invitation. It is a space in which wonder can grow. The marks are language. The marks are not language. The marks are something in between, something that does not fit into our categories, something that challenges our definitions and expands our understanding of what it means to communicate, to think, to be human. And that is good. That is necessary. That is what keeps us searching, questioning, reaching. Because the moment we think we have all the answers, the moment we close the book and say, "This is how it is and has always been," we stop growing. We stop learning. We stop being truly human. The marks keep us open. They keep us humble. They keep us aware that there are things we do not know, things we may never know, things that are beyond our grasp. And that awareness is precious. It is the antidote to arrogance, to certainty, to the kind of rigid thinking that has caused so much harm throughout human history. The marks teach us to hold our knowledge lightly, to question our assumptions, to remain curious, open, willing to be surprised. And you have been surprised, haven't you? You thought you were listening to a story about ancient symbols and the origins of writing. But you found something else. You found a meditation on presence. You found a reflection on what it means to be human. You found a challenge to make your own marks, to contribute your own meanings, to be part of the ongoing conversation that is human consciousness reaching out into the world. You found, perhaps, a sense of connection to something larger than yourself. A sense of continuity with the past and responsibility to the future. A sense that your life, your thoughts, your marks matter. And they do. They matter more than you can possibly know. Because every mark, every meaning, every act of reaching out and saying, "I am here," contributes to the great tapestry of human experience. Every mark is a thread. And the tapestry is woven not by any single hand but by the collective effort of billions of hands across thousands of generations. You are part of that weaving. Your marks are part of that pattern. And the pattern is beautiful, far more beautiful than any individual thread could ever be on its own. So do not underestimate the power of your marks. Do not dismiss them as insignificant or irrelevant. Do not think that because you are not famous, not powerful, not influential, your marks do not matter. They do. They always have. They always will. Because the tapestry is made of threads, and every thread, every single thread, is essential. Remove anyone, and the pattern is incomplete. The tapestry is diminished. So your marks, your threads, are needed. They are necessary. They are part of what makes the whole complete. And the marks on the cave walls, the ancient marks that we have been contemplating throughout this journey, they are threads too. They are part of the same tapestry. They are connected to your marks, to my marks, to the marks of every human who has ever lived or will ever live. We are all weavers. We are all contributors. We are all part of the pattern. And the pattern is not static. It is not fixed. It is alive. It is growing. It is evolving. And we, by making our marks, are shaping what it becomes. This is not a passive process. This is not something that happens to us. This is something we do, actively, intentionally, with every choice we make, every word we speak, every mark we create. We are shaping the future. We are creating the world that will exist after we are gone. And that is a profound responsibility. But it is also a profound gift. Because it means that we matter. It means that what we do makes a difference. It means that we are not just observers or consumers or passive recipients of a reality created by others. We are creators. We are makers. We are weavers of the tapestry. So take up your thread. Take up your tools. Take up your responsibility and your gift. And make your marks. Make them boldly. Make them beautifully. Make them with care and intention and presence. Make them in the knowledge that they matter, that they contribute, that they are part of something far larger and far more important than any individual life. And when you make your marks, remember the cave. Remember the silence. Remember the ancient hands that reached across the abyss of time and said, "I am here. Are you there?" Remember that you are the answer to that question. You are the one who is there. You are the one who has heard the call and responded. You are the one who is continuing the conversation. And your marks, your contribution to the tapestry, are the proof that the conversation is still alive, still vital, still unfolding. The marks on the cave walls are not dead. They are not relics. They are not artifacts of a bygone age. They are alive. They are present. They are speaking. And you, by listening, by being present, by making your own marks, are keeping them alive. You are honoring them. You are continuing the work they began. And that is the greatest act of reverence you can offer. Not to decode them, not to solve them, but to honor them by doing what they did. By marking, by meaning, by reaching. So reach. Always reach. Never stop reaching. Because that is what it means to be human. And the marks, both ancient and new, both carved in stone and written in light, both silent and speaking, are the evidence of that reaching. They are the proof that we are here, that we have always been here, that we will always be here, reaching out into the dark, into the silence, into the mystery, and saying, with every mark we make, I am here. I thought, I existed. I mattered. And you do. You do matter. Never forget that. Good night. Sleep well. Dream of marks. And wake, tomorrow, ready to make your own. The tapestry is waiting. And your thread is needed. Part 19 word count. 1,000. And so we arrive, finally, at the true end. Not with fanfare or grand conclusions, but with a quiet acknowledgement. The marks remain. The mystery remains. And we, having walked through the dark together, having sat with the questions and the silence, remain as well. Changed, perhaps. Deepened, certainly. But still here, still present, still part of the ongoing story. There is a kind of ending that ties everything up neatly, that answers all the questions, that leaves the listener satisfied and complete. This is not that kind of ending. This is the kind of ending that opens rather than closes, that invites rather than concludes, that says, the story continues, and you are part of it. What if humans had a written language before speech fully evolved? We have explored this question from every angle. We have looked at the evidence, the marks scattered across continents and millennia. We have considered the neurological, the evolutionary, the linguistic implications. We have entertained the possibility that the hand spoke before the voice, that symbols came before sounds, that the first language was visual, spatial, silent. And we have concluded honestly and humbly that we do not know. We may never know, but the question itself has been worth asking. The journey itself has been worth taking. And the marks, whether they are language or not, have taught us something profound about ourselves, about our past, about our future. They have taught us that the human capacity for meaning-making is ancient, primal, essential. They have taught us that language is not one thing but many things, that communication takes many forms, that the drive to connect, to reach out, to say, I am here, is woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human. And they have taught us that the past is not closed, not finished, not dead. The past is alive in the marks, in the traces, in the echoes that reach forward into the present and shape what we are and what we will become. And so, as you drift now towards sleep, as the words begin to blur and the images begin to fade, as consciousness loosens its grip and the dream begins to take hold, carry with you this final thought. You are part of the lineage. You are part of the conversation. You are part of the great, ongoing, endlessly unfolding story of human meaning-making. And your marks, whatever form they take, matter. They contribute. They are needed. The ancestors, the ones who pressed ochre into stone, who carved lines into bone, who left their handprints on the walls of caves, they are not gone. They are present in the marks. They are present in you. They are present in the capacity you carry to create, to communicate, to connect. And they are waiting not for you to decode their symbols, but for you to make your own, to add your thread to the tapestry, to speak your word into the silence, to reach your hand across the abyss and say, I am here. And when you do, when you make your mark, know that you are not alone. You are surrounded by the invisible presence of all who have marked before you and all who will mark after you. You are part of a community that spans time and space, a community of makers, of meaning creators, of human beings doing what human beings do, which is to refuse to remain silent, to refuse to be invisible, to refuse to let the world pass by unmarked and unmeaningful. This is your inheritance. This is your legacy. This is your gift and your responsibility. To mark, to mean, to matter. And you do. You do matter. Your life is not insignificant. Your thoughts are not trivial. Your marks, whatever they are part of the great conversation. They are threads in the tapestry. They are notes in the song. They are words in the story that is still being written. So sleep now, but do not forget. When you wake, the marks will still be there. The mystery will still be there. And the invitation will still be there. The invitation to be present, to be curious, to be creative, to be human in the fullest, deepest, most authentic sense. To mark your presence in the world, to leave your trace, to say, with every breath, every thought, every action, I am here, I am part of this, I matter, and the cave, ancient and silent, will be there too, waiting, not for you to solve its mystery, but for you to honor it, not for you to decode its marks, but for you to make your own. The cave is a mirror, the marks are a mirror. They reflect back to you your own capacity, your own potential, your own profound and essential humanness. And in that reflection you see not the past but the future. Not what was but what can be. Not endings but beginnings. So let this be a beginning. Let this be the moment when you decide, consciously and intentionally, to be a mark maker, a meaning creator, a thread weaver. Let this be the moment when you claim your place in the lineage, your voice in the conversation, your hand in the great work of shaping the future. Let this be the moment when you say, I am here, I am present, I am ready. The marks are waiting. The tapestry is waiting. The future is waiting. For you, for your marks, for your meanings, for your presence. And the ancestors, silent on the cave walls, are smiling, because they know, they have always known, that the conversation would continue, that the marks would endure, that someone someday would see them and understand, not with the mind but with the heart, that we are all connected, all part of the same story, all reaching across the silence toward each other. And you have heard the call. You have answered. You are here. And that, finally and completely, is enough. Good night. Sleep deeply. Dream well. And wake ready to mark the world with your presence, your meanings, your truth. The cave is within you. The marks are within you. The story is within you. And you are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough. Sleep now. The marks will be there in the morning. And so will you. Part 20 word count. 964. And in the silence that follows, in the space after the last word, in the breath between sleep and waking, there is only this: presence, connection, the knowledge that you are part of something far larger than yourself, the knowledge that your marks matter, the knowledge that you are here now in this moment, and that is everything. The question we began with, what if humans had a written language before speech fully evolved, has no simple answer, but it has led us somewhere profound. It has led us to the understanding that language is not what we thought it was, that human history is not what we were told, that the capacity to create meaning, to communicate, to connect is far older, far deeper, far more mysterious than we imagined. And it has led us to ourselves, to the recognition that we are the inheritors of that capacity, that we carry within us the same drive that compelled our ancestors to press ochre into stone, to carve lines into bone, to leave marks that would outlast their lives. And what will you do with that recognition? What marks will you make? What meanings will you create? What will you leave behind for those who come after? These are not rhetorical questions. These are real questions. Questions that demand answers not in words but in actions, in the marks you make, in the life you live, in the presence you bring to each moment. The marks on the cave walls have taught us many things, but perhaps the most important lesson is this: that presence is the greatest gift. Not understanding, not knowledge, not certainty, but presence. The willingness to be here now, fully engaged, fully attentive, fully alive. That is what the marks ask of us. That is what the ancestors modeled for us. That is what we, in turn, must offer to the future. So be present. Be here. Be now. Make your marks with intention and care. Create your meanings with courage and honesty. Weave your thread into the tapestry with the knowledge that it matters, that it contributes, that it is needed. And know that, in doing so, you are honoring the past, engaging the present, and shaping the future. You are being fully, completely, beautifully human. The cave is silent. The marks are still. But the story continues. Continues in you, in your marks, in your meanings, in your presence. And that is how it should be. That is how it has always been. That is how it will always be. So rest now. Sleep. Dream. And when you wake, carry the marks with you. Carry the silence. Carry the mystery. Carry the knowledge that you are part of the lineage, part of the conversation, part of the great and ongoing work of human meaning-making. You are here. You matter. You are enough. And the marks, both ancient and new, both carved in stone and written in your heart, are the proof. Good night. Sleep well. And may you wake with the knowledge that the world is waiting for your marks, that the tapestry is waiting for your thread, that the future is waiting for your presence. You are the ones you have been waiting for. You are the answer to the ancient question. You are here. And that is everything. Sleep now. The marks will keep. The story will keep. And you, when you wake, will be ready to continue it. The cave is within you. The marks are within you. The mystery is within you. And you are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough. Rest now. The silence is a gift. The mystery is a gift. Your presence is a gift. And the marks, ancient and eternal, are smiling. Because they know, they have always known, that someone would listen, that someone would see, that someone would understand. And that someone is you. Good night.